Hey there, welcome to sound training number 2. In this lesson, we're going to talk about the big picture of running sound at your campus. In lesson number 1, we really talked about the most important part of being a sound person, and that is the heart behind it. But now we're going to move into some of the more fundamental aspects of running sound at your campus. The first thing we're going to talk about today is being the first one there. This is really important because your worship team is really relying on you to have things set up and to have the stage right for them, to have the cables where they need to go. And this is going to help just make the morning go a lot smoother. So if you're there first and you can have the equipment and everything set up and ready for them to go, this is just going to ensure a successful morning. So this may mean that you want to be there anywhere from 15 to 30 minutes early. Before that first worship team member gets there, you want to be there making sure that they're going to have an easy time when they arrive. The next thing we want to focus on today is knowing your team. This is really important because every team has very different aspects to it. You may have teams with 2 electric guitarists, there may be teams with 2 acoustic guitarists, and you need to know the part that each individual member on the team plays so that you can be prepared to mix them, you can be prepared to set up for them. You also may realize that, for instance, a vocalist may be a little more shy and like to stand back from her mic, and you can help to direct that person to be a little bit closer to their mic so that you can be more effective in mixing them. So it's really important to know your team as you're setting up and as you're running sound at your campus, that you're able to take each individual nuance and work with it. It's also really important to know your audience. You may have a older crowd at the morning service at your campus. You may have a younger crowd at the 10:30 or the noon service, or maybe even the Saturday night service if you have one. And it's important to know who is there, to know the appropriate volume and the appropriate way to mix for your audience. This doesn't mean that you have to change everything about the way you mix, but just that you're aware of your surroundings and who is at the service that you are mixing. The next thing that I'd like to focus on today is really knowing your stage and your room. Every room has different acoustics. Every room is going to have dead spots and really bright spots, maybe spots where the bass is just really, really booming and loud, and spots where you can't hear it at all. And if you're not aware of those things, it's really easy to maybe mix the low end too loud, mix the high end too quiet. As you're aware of the acoustics in your room, and as you're able to move around and hear the different nuances of where each frequency is accentuated and where it's diminished, you will become better at mixing. This really means that each campus is going to be different. Each service may be a little different. It may be different depending on what instruments that you have, but it's really important that you're aware of the acoustics of your room and what's going on stage. The next thing I would like to talk about is really knowing the songs that your worship team is playing. It may not seem important at first to have a good understanding of the songs that the team is playing, but if you think about it, each team is going and they're practicing these songs. The electric guitarist is practicing his part. The acoustic guitarist is practicing his part. The vocalists are practicing their parts and their harmonies and maybe different parts of leading. And it's really important that you as a sound person know those parts so that you can make sure that those parts are heard. It's really just such a simple aspect of what we do as sound engineers, is making sure that what is played is heard. And it sounds really simple, but sometimes that's a difficult thing if we don't know the songs. And so, there may be a guitar solo or a piano part that's really important at the beginning of the song. And maybe throughout the song, that piano part isn't that important, but right at the beginning, it's really the main aspect of the song. And so it's important that you know that so that you can make sure that part stands out. It's also really important at your campus to keep your mixes consistent. There are 2 main areas that you're going to need to worry about mixing on each service. And the first one is the monitors, the second is the mains. The difficult thing is that sometimes the monitors and the mains really can tend to fight each other. Some of our campuses are moving to in-ear headphones, and that's great. That really makes things easier. But the main thing is that from service to service, you want your mixes to be consistent, and you really want the aspects that are important to really stand out. And I would say that the very most important thing is that the vocals are clear and that they're heard above everything else, because after all, the lyrics and the singing is really what this is all about. It's also really important to make sure that you're mixing and getting a really solid mix during the rehearsal at your service. It's really important that once you move into the actual services that we're not making big distinct changes. This is important for a lot of reasons. The first is that it can just create kind of a chaos when it comes to the service itself, and if volumes are changing in the middle of the service, sometimes that's even detectable by people attending the service. But even more importantly, it's really a distracting and an annoyance to your worship team. Think about it, when they're practicing, things in their headphones or things in their monitors are one way, and then when they get to the service, it's a completely different sound, or it's a different mix, and that can be frustrating for them. And so kind of put yourself in their shoes, and make sure that when you're mixing, that you really get that solid mix during rehearsal, so that you can get everything set in their monitors, and then that doesn't have to change throughout the service. I think that's one of the most important things that you can do as a sound engineer to help make sure that the atmosphere stays worshipful and that there are less distractions, is make sure that mix is solid during rehearsal. Going right along with that is making sure that the stage volume at your campus stays as low as possible. And as I mentioned earlier, some campuses are moving towards the in-ear monitors, and so that's great, because at that point your stage volume is basically zero. But there are a lot of campuses that are still using wedges, and you have amplifiers and drums on stage, and so it's important that your stage volume is as low as it possibly can be. This may mean that there are some compromises for your worship team members, that maybe they can't have every instrument as loud as they want it, and they may have to make some choices as far as what's important for them to hear. But work with them closely to find out what mix is the best for them in their monitors, and work with them to keep that stage volume low. As I said before, if you're mixing the front of house and the monitors, those things are going to be fighting each other, and if you are too loud in your monitors, and say you're already at 90 dB or 95 dB on stage, it's going to be really hard to get a good mix without going too loud out in the auditorium. So make sure that our stage volume stays as low as it can be. One of the best ways to get a good mix is to be mobile, to move around your room. Most of our campuses actually have the ability to connect your iPad and to be able to actually mix as you're moving around the room. But doing such will help you get the best mix overall. As we discussed earlier, you may have different areas in your room that the acoustics work differently, and you may have areas in your room that are just hotter because they're closer to the speakers. This is why it's important to move around and hear what the sound is like, regardless of where the congregation may be sitting. As we talked about earlier, vocals really are the priority. They are the most important thing as you're mixing at your campus. It's the most important thing for the people in your congregation to hear, so that they can sing along, so that the words are heard and easily understood, that the vocals are the priority in your mix. So this may mean, if you've mixed other places, you're used to really mixing those vocals into the mix. This may mean actually placing the vocals above the mix a little bit. And that may be a little bit awkward at first to do, but it is actually going to be the best thing for your congregation. It's going to be the best thing for your campus as they're in your worship service and they're singing along, that they can hear those lyrics and that they feel comfortable singing along with them. The last thing I want to cover today is understanding that each instrument that you're mixing is unique. They all have a unique sound. They all have a unique frequency range that they cover. And for this reason, it's important for you to understand the sound and the frequency ranges of those instruments, and to be able to mix, to give each instrument its place within the mix. We have resources available for you. We have an equalization resource, which is great, that will help you understand how to carve holes in your mix, carve frequency holes in your mix, so that you can place each instrument without just cranking up the volume. And really, when it comes down to it, mixing isn't so much about just turning volumes up and down, but it's about really giving each unique instrument its place within the mix. And so understanding the instruments that you have on stage and what place that they take within that mix. And this really goes back to knowing the songs that your team is doing. And if you've gone home and you've listened to the songs, if you've gotten the worship email and you've listened to the songs that your team is going to be playing, it's going to help you have a better understanding of where those instruments should sit in the mix and how to give each its clarity. So those are 10 things that we can all work and put into practice at our church campus. We barely scratched the surface of everything that we could cover, or barely scratched the surface of the depth that we could go into on these 10 things. So I encourage each of you to work with your worship team, work with the other sound engineers on your team, and to put these things into practice and to go further and study, to look into further resources. So go back into your campus and work on putting these things into practice and really honing in on those skills that you have as a sound engineer.